So in today's video, we are going to explore animation tweens. So today is our introduction to Unit 2 for animation class. In the previous unit, we explored, actually we're not in Unit 2. I always forget the first unit. It's such a quick little assignment, you know, that Photoshop animation assignment that I always forget that that's the first assignment. So this is actually Unit 3. So we're in Unit 3. And we are exploring animation tweens in this unit. So for today's demonstration, we're just going to do what I call playing in the sandbox. We're going to explore two different types of animation tweens. One is called a shape tween and the other one is called a classic tween. And we are going to use one supplemental file today from our supplemental files folder. And if you go to that folder in Blackboard, you'll see a link for a file called Bird of Paradise Flower. So if you want to go ahead and just download that, that way we'll have it handy. And when we're ready to use it, we'll have it there to be able to pull into our scene when we're ready. So we'll be using that document to explore symbols. So that's another concept that we're going to explore in this unit. In addition to exploring two different types of animation tweens, the shape tween and the classic tween, we're also going to explore symbols and what symbols are and how we use them in our animations. So the first kind of tween that we're going to explore in today's demonstration is a shape tween. And so to get started, let's just create a shape. We'll go over here to our shape creation tool in the tool window, and you can choose any shape you want. I'm going to choose the oval tool. And I'm just going to click and drag and create a circle. And right now, my circle is really transparent because if you look in my color fill window, it shows the transparency grid in the background. And the reason why it drew my shape with those kind of qualities is because that was the fill setting the last time I created a shape and filled it with a color in Adobe Animate. So I'm just going to change the alpha for my shape. In order to do that, I actually need to select my shape first. So I'm going to select my shape, and then I'm going to click on the color fill window and choose the alpha percentage. You can see that mine is set to 20, and I'll just boost it up. So if you're following along on your end, you might not even be having that issue, but I just wanted to explain if you do see that, that's what's going on. Also, it sampled the color of the interface. It changed it from yellow to gray. That was not intended, so I'm just going to go ahead and reselect my shape and then go back to the color fill window and just choose something bright like this green will do fine. Okay, so we have a shape created now on our stage. And let's turn our attention to the timeline for a moment, and let's just give ourselves a few frames to work with. So I'm just going to come out here to frame 50. And I'm going to select that frame, and I'm going to hit F5. So I'm just going to extend the visibility of my object. And then in these frames that you see that we've just created where we extended the visibility, I'm going to apply a shape tween to this. So we're actually applying an effect to that layer in the timeline, and that effect will allow us to control this object in a very specific way. So in this example, we're going to change aspects about its shape, but also its color and position, and even rotation and scale. So to apply the tween to your timeline, you want to click just anywhere in these frames, it doesn't matter where, and then control click or right click to get the special editing menu and choose Shape Tween. Yes, create Shape Tween. And you'll notice as soon as you apply that the timeline is going to have a special color assigned to it. This is the color of a Shape Tween when it's applied to your timeline. You'll also see that after the keyframe that there are a lot of little dots just all across this timeline. So what that means is we have applied a shape tween, but we haven't actually performed the task of a shape tween yet. So we've not actually completed the shape tween process, but it is ready to go to be able to animate this object using the shape tween effect. So just a very simple example of what we can do with this shape is, let's just go ahead and create a keyframe at the very last frame of this layers timeline. So just click on that frame and hit F6, and you'll see that dotted line has now updated to be a continuous straight line with an arrow at the very end of it. So the reason why that appearance has changed is because now we have applied a shape tween in between two keyframes. And so that means that we are ready to create a shape tween. We have a complete ability to do a shape tween. So at keyframe 1, our shape is going to look like whatever you just created on your stage. So mine looks like a green circle. I'm going to go down here to this keyframe now. And when I select that keyframe, you can see it still selects that shape, and it is ready for me to do something different to it at this keyframe. So one simple thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this shape up, and I'm going to move it right over here, just right to the right of the stage. Now I'm going to go back to my first keyframe and select it. Now I'm only doing this so that you can see the effect that change that we made in that object has had on that object. Now just hit return to play your animation, and it moves the ball to where you placed it at the second keyframe. So tween is really just a short-term word for in between. So it fills in all those spaces in between those two keyframes. And these two keyframes actually have an effect on each other. So when I set this keyframe and then set this object's new position just at this keyframe, I didn't have to create a series of keyframes like we did in the frame-by-frame animation to move that ball across the stage smoothly. This program just went ahead and did that for me because I applied the shape tween effect. Now, this is called the shape tween, right? We didn't do anything to change the shape of this object. What we did was we just simply moved this object. So now let's do something to change the shape of the object. I'm going to leave this object the way it looks at keyframe 1, but I'm going to come down here and click keyframe 2, and this time I'm going to do some things to subtly change this shape. And this is also a great opportunity to just further explore how you can manipulate shapes with the various tools in Adobe Animate. So I'm going to choose just the basic selection tool. So I've moved from the free transform tool to the basic selection tool. And pay close attention to what happens to your cursor as you place it in different aspects of this shape. So if I place the arrow here to the side, it's just an arrow, and if I click, it does nothing. If I place the arrow right over the path of that shape, so every shape is defined by a path, and that's the outer perimeter or contour line that defines that shape. When you place your cursor over that path, you'll see a little arc symbol appear next to that arrow. And what that means is you have the ability to affect the shape or the geometry of this shape simply by clicking and dragging and kind of pushing that shape's contour edge. So it's almost like, taking your finger and smudging paint or pastel or something that you can kind of smear on a canvas. This kind of has that effect to it. Now, one thing that you could do with this effect that always comes to mind, I don't use it often, but like you could actually animate something having a pulsating effect. And we can experiment with that here in a moment. We'll create a heart and make it beat just using this simple little shape manipulation trick. So I've kind of distorted this way beyond its original appearance, but that's okay. I wanted something that looked starkly different. All right, so now I'm going to go back to keyframe 1 and I'm going to play my animation, and let's just see how this shape tween morphs this circle into this kind of fluid looking organic shape that I ended up with. So it fills in all those shapes in between. Now you've got to keep your shape manipulation pretty simple when you use this tween effect for manipulating shapes. So you're not going to be able to turn, say something simple like an apple or a banana and then turn it into a bicycle. That's just, you're never going to be able to make that kind of transition between shapes. But you can do some interesting subtle things with the shape tween. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is that this only works on shapes. So once we move into symbols, we lose the ability to apply a shape tween to an object. So when we move on to symbols, you'll learn about other types of tweens that can be applied to those. So again, we just changed the shape. So there is the shape tween effect for what this tween was named after. But we can also change the color of a shape in a shape tween. So that's kind of cool too. So let's just go down here and click on our keyframe at the end of the timeline, and let's assign this shape a new color. So I'm going to select my shape and go to the color picker window. And then I'm just going to come down here into this box and choose something that's the opposite of green. So I'm going to choose orange. And now let's see our transition. So I'll go back to the first keyframe and select that. Hit the return key and play my animation. So we have a shape that's moved in position. It's changed in geometry. It's also changed in its color information. Something else that you can do in a shape tween is you can interrupt the trajectory of an object by placing keyframes within that tween. So right now we have this object just moving right across the stage and going through all of its morphing processes as it moves across the stage. But what if we wanted to arc up into the air and maybe even rotate a little bit and either scale up or down in the middle of this tween, and then end up just the way it ends up at this keyframe all in the end? Well, we can do that. So I'm going to place the keyframe right here, or I'm going to place the playhead right in between these two keyframes. I'm going to select a frame, just anywhere in there, but kind of make it in the middle, and I'm going to hit F6. So we've just inserted a keyframe at F6, and now I'm going to interact with my shape. I can just go directly to the shape on the stage, move it up in the air. I'm going to switch tools now. I'm going to move from the selection tool to the free transform tool, because remember, this tool allows you to do the things that I was just describing that I want to do with this object. I want to scale it and rotate it as well as be able to move it. I'm going to rotate it around its center point, so I'm going to leave that right there. And I'm going to place my cursor out to one of these corner scaling handles. But I'm not actually going to touch the handle. I'm going to watch for my cursor to have this kind of appearance, which means that I'm in rotation mode, and I'm just going to rotate my shape. And I'll scale it a little bit. And I'm doing a freehand approach in scaling. I'm just clicking and dragging, which kind of distorts my object a little bit. But if you want to scale your objects and keep the proportions constrained, you can hold the Shift key down to do that. So all of these adjustments I just made at this keyframe. Now let's go back to the first keyframe and let's play our animation. And there we go. So how'd that work for you?
think I'm actually.
Are you lost?
No, I think I'm actually good.
Are you good? I bet you are. Hang on a second. I'll come check it out. All right. So for this playing in the sandbox part of the demonstration, we just created something that was just very, non-representational, very abstract to explore this idea of a shape tween. So now let's create something that's a little more recognizable or representational, and then apply a shape tween and animate it in a way that works contextually with the visual element. So let's create a heart. So let's just go over here to our basic shape creation tools. And, I'm kind of thinking, let's start with the polygon star tool. And I'm going to do this on a whole separate layer. So I'm just going to turn this layer off and create a new layer. And I'm going to name this one heart. I just hit the visibility button. So if you look in this column where the eyeball is at the top, go to that layer and click in that little window, and you'll see an eyeball with a slash through it, which sounds painful. Okay, so I've got the polygon tool, and the reason why I chose this tool is because this is a great example, or at least I think it's going to be. I hope it doesn't totally bomb on me, but this is a great example of how you can use basic geometric shapes as a good starting point to build out from that other recognizable objects. And so the polygon tool, it creates polygons for sure, but I'm going to undo that. If you click and drag while you're holding the mouse button down, hold on, I'm getting confused with Illustrator. Double click on this tool, or double click, select the tool, double click in the window. This is not working. I thought it would. It's supposed to make a star. But it's just deleting the whole thing. And then I thought, maybe if I double click. Okay, there's something I'm overlooking. Let's go to properties. Okay. So when you select this tool, go to the properties window. I'm trying to walk you through how to start out with a triangle. So in the tool options, you have what's called style. So you have the top polygon, you have a star you can choose from. I'll switch to star. And I don't want 5 sides, I want 3. Just scrub through. Where it says number of sides down here, yeah. I just changed it to 3. And I don't want 0 point size. So I don't want point size. So I'm just going to set that to 0. And hopefully I just end up with a plain old triangle. Nope. Hold on. I'm going to get this. There we go. So 1 point, how about 2 point? That might work for 2 point size. Let me try this one more time. I'm going to go with polygon. There we go. I should have never switched it to star. I should just stay with polygon. So my apologies. So keep it on polygon. Number of sides, 3. And I have star point size as just 1. I don't know that it has any effect on it at all, but mainly 3 sides. And that will give you a triangle. So we're good to go. Now, right now, this is a triangle where it's sitting on its base. I want to turn this into a heart. And so let's just animate this whole process of this transforming into a heart. So let's go to our heart layers timeline, and let's apply a shape tween. Okay, that's to the timeline. Remember how we should apply the shape to create shape tween? So apply that. Huh?
Or just to the end and apply it?
Just apply it to the whole thing. And then at the very end, we're going to apply a keyframe.
So, create shape.
Uh-huh. So does it look like this? Do you have a Shape Tween applied to your timeline?
Did you press F6 for that long arrow?
I did. I got the long arrow once I applied a keyframe at the last frame.
So F6?
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it? All right. So right now, at the beginning of this animation, I'm going to start out with a green triangle. Let me see if I can kind of level that a little bit. It's not letting me have total control of my rotation. Sorry, I know this is about as much as interesting as watching paint dry, me trying to level this triangle, but I shouldn't obsess about it. Okay, so what I want to do next is I want to go down here to this last keyframe, and I'm going to change the color from green to pink. You are? Okay, that's fine. You've already been through the changing of the color, so that's fine. Now, something else that I want to do is I want to, at this last keyframe, I want this to flip the other way. So I've animated a rotation. And I'm going to, let's see if we can do this at the last keyframe. Ow. So I'm going to add an anchor point to this path, right in the center. So I did that using the pen tool. I clicked on the path, and at first it selected the path, and then when I clicked on the path once more, then it created an anchor point. An anchor point. So the anchor point allows us to change certain aspects of a shape's path. And so I need this anchor point to serve as the point that holds that recessed part at the top of a heart. It keeps this line stable right here so that we can bow these two sides, or the sides on either side of this anchor point, up into a rounded shape to create a heart. Got it? Did that work for you?
What tool did you use for that?
The pen tool. And that is a tool that we have not explored yet. But what this tool does is it allows you to apply anchor points to a path.
Is that the pencil tool?
Nope. It looks like a pen right here. You see that? And when you hover over it, it says the pen tool. Did you find it?
No, I just found like that anchor point.
Okay, I'll come take a look. Okay, so I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to describe or kind of go over this tool, the pen tool, because this is one tool that we did not explore when we were exploring just the basic drawing modes in Adobe Animate. But this is a tool that's worth exploring because if you think that you want to create some animations where you actually get in there and really manipulate shapes and work with their geometry, you'll need to understand the concept of paths, and specifically paths with vector art. So if you're familiar with Adobe Illustrator, everything that you create in that program is vector art. That means that every shape is defined by a path, and then that path can be filled or it can be left open where you just have a path that kind of acts almost like a window if it's a closed path. So anyway, we just now explored just briefly how to do a simple manipulation with a shape's path just using the selection tool. But if you want to have more control over a shape's path, then you'll need to get familiar with the pen tool and the convert anchor point tool, and also the sub-selection tool. So that's what this tool is for. The selection tool allows you to select shapes so that you can pick them up and move them and do various things with them where you just can scale them, move them, and maybe even rotate them. But the sub-selection tool is what lets you drill down to the level of the shape's path. And when you select a shape's path using this sub-selection tool, it will illuminate these little tiny boxes. And you'll usually see them at specific points of a path. Like here, we see them at the corners of this triangle. I just manually created an anchor point in the middle of this line segment because I want to turn this into a heart. And so in order to manipulate this shape with the sub-selection tool, you would actually select these anchor points and then click and drag and move them to different places. And it changes the geometry of your shape that way. Now, what I'm working with right now are what are called corner anchor points. So that means that anywhere I move this anchor point to change this shape's geometry will be followed by and repositioned by straight line segments between those anchor points. So I can move this anchor point freely anywhere I want. I can even kind of invert it on the shape itself. Of course, I just think I might have accidentally deleted my anchor points doing that because I'm working with a merge drawn object. That's why. So, you know, I can move this freely, but wherever I move it, I'm going to end up with straight line segments. So there's another type of anchor point that you can work with called a curved anchor point. And let me show you how that works. I'm going to reset that to a triangle. So if I come over here to my pen tool and click and hold that mouse button, I'm looking for a tool called the Convert Anchor Point tool. This tool will allow me to convert these anchor points from corner anchor points to curved anchor points simply by clicking on these anchor points and holding the mouse button down and dragging dragging away from the anchor point. And so what you're seeing right now is, let me go back. You're seeing directional handles being pulled from that shape. And the reason why my shape keeps cropping on itself and disappearing if I release the mouse button at this point is because I've drawn this object in merge drawn mode, and so it has a cropping effect when I release the mouse button. And so you can see that this path is kind of tangled on itself. That is very common when you're, converting anchor points. If you see that happen while you still have the directional handle pulled out, just rotate it and untangle that path. And now you can see we have this shape that has a curved line to it. So I'm going to do the same thing with this anchor point over here. I'm just going to convert it from a corner to a curved. And this time the path was not tangled on itself. So all I have to do is just click and drag away from that anchor point to release the directional handles. And it also, as you can see, extends the length of the path and allows me to curve that path out into something that's more rounded. If I want to do any more editing with this path by just selecting these anchor points, then I'll need to switch tools. So I'll need to move either from the Convert Anchor Point tool or Pen tool, whichever one I have selected, and I'll need to go and select the Sub-Selection tool to edit my path. So these tools, the Pen tool and other tools associated with the pen tool, like the Convert Anchor Point tool, these tools are simply for creating anchor points and changing the behavior of the anchor point. And that's it. Beyond that point, if you want to edit a path and edit a shape's geometry by manipulating the shape's path, you will need to work with the sub-selection tool, because this tool is the tool and the only tool that allows you to select anchor points directly and be able to manipulate a shape that way. So I just moved some anchor points around, changed their behaviors, and manipulated this shape into the shape of a heart. And so now when I scrub through my timeline to go all the way back to the beginning, you can see at keyframe 1 what my shape started out as. And then if I hit the return key and play the whole animation, it morphs into a heart. Now, if I want this heart to beat, I can do that quite simply. Let's do this past the final keyframe where the object finally turns into a heart. I'm going to make this side a little bit bigger. And I'm going to extend the visibility of this shape. And for me, I'm going to go out to about frame 85. So I'm just going out about 45 frames. And I'm going to hit the F6 key and create a keyframe. And then in between these two keyframes, I'm going to create a series of keyframes. So I'm going to do that by selecting a frame. I'm going to do this like every 5 frames in the timeline until I get to frame 85. I'm going to create a keyframe, but I'm going to do it as I work through my animation. So I'm not going to go ahead and set the keyframes just yet. I'm going to create them as I need them to animate my shape. So at this keyframe, my heart shape is going to get a little bit bigger. I'm going to try doing this with the basic selection tool. I'm not wild about that. So maybe I'll use the free transform tool.
How do you use
The sub selection tool?
Yeah.
You just select directly on the path and to reveal the anchor points. And then you can interact with these anchor points directly.
Those anchor points.
Okay, I'll come check it out. And it is important that you create a keyframe where you in the place where you want to be able to access the anchor points. Otherwise, if you just click on the frame in an area of the timeline where there's no keyframe, it will not be responsive. It will not show you the anchor points. So the only time you can really interact with the shapes, qualities, properties directly is at the place or at the point of a keyframe in the timeline. So I have my keyframe selected and I'm just going to make some subtle movements. So the one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the shift key down and begin to select anchor points on one side of the heart. And then I'm just using my arrow key to kind of nudge the side of the heart out, about 3-4 little spaces. And I'd already done that with one side of the heart, so that's why you just saw me do that with this side just now, the other side. Then I'm going to move out to a place in the timeline about 5 or 6 frames out and hit F6 to create a new keyframe. And then I will go back to my object and select it. And I'll select these keyframes. Let me see if I can do it with the lasso tool. Nope. I almost select these anchor points. I think I just called them keyframes. I didn't mean to. I'm holding the shift key down. But I will tell you, I don't really think that this is the best way to do it, because I see that it begins to make extra anchor points. So let's do something different. Okay, so one problem that we run into, I really didn't anticipate this. I guess I don't work with paths as often as I thought I did in Animate. But I noticed that at this keyframe, the first one that I made, to start the beating heart effect, when I select my path with the subselection tool, I have 4 anchor points, which is perfect. That's really all I need to work with. But when I want to create a new keyframe further in the timeline to create that beating effect, to be able to do that by manipulating the shape through the anchor points, when I create that keyframe and then come back and select my object, it has created more anchor points. Well, that's going to get really messy, and it's just not a practical way to try and control a shape as you're trying to manipulate it. So for a simple beating effect, and we'll come back and revisit shape manipulation with something that's a little more straightforward. But for just animating a beating heart effect for this, you could just do something very simple by just creating keyframes, and at every new keyframe, you can adjust the height and the width of your object. So I'm just going to scale it directly on the stage because I want to scale from its center point out. I'm holding the shift key down as I scale it. And then I'll come out a few more frames and create a new keyframe. And this time I'm going to hold the shift key down and scale it back down. And then I'll come out a few more frames and hit F6 and scale it back up. Go down the timeline a few more frames, create another keyframe, scale it back down. A few more frames out, create a new keyframe, expand it up. Come out a few frames, create another keyframe. And then in that final one, it expands it up a little bit. So now let's check out our animation. So now I'm going to hit the return key. And there we go. So we have an object that morphs from a green triangle to a pink heart, and then the heart starts beating once it's made its final transformation. So now let's revisit just manipulating simple shapes using the Shape Tween technique. And let's just do something, again, that's really simple. I did not mean to move that. And I'm going to lock that layer and hide it. Let's just create a face with some eyebrows. So I'm going to start with an oval tool. I've created a new layer. And this face is just going to be very, very simple, like just very, very abstract, almost like an emoticon. In fact, you could make it look like one if you want. I don't care. So I'm going to select my object. I'm going to get rid of the black outline. So this will be the the head of the face. Let's give it some eyes. And I'll do this in object drawn mode. Or I could have just duplicated that one. And give it a mouth. Alright, and now I'm just going to give it some little eyebrows. I'm trying to make something look kind of like an emoticon. So we're going to use a Shape Tween to animate different parts of this little simple face expressions. I'm going to create another layer for the eyebrows. And I'm going to make those with just 2 line segments. So I'm going to use the line tool to do this. And put one here and put one here. So we're going to animate his expressions just using some Shape Tweens and get some real simple effects going. And it's also going to require you to get familiar with these different tools for selecting objects and moving them and selecting them in a certain way because each of these selection tools do very different things. And let's apply some Shape Tweens to these layers. I'm going to select both of these layers, or the timelines, by holding the Shift key down and just selecting anywhere in these timelines. So you can see I have 2 sets of frames selected together in 2 different layers. And I'll just Control click and choose Create Shape Tween. Alright, so right now my guy looks pretty mad, right? So I'm going to change his expression. I'm going to relax those eyebrows a little bit. And I'm going to do all this just by doing some subtle manipulations with these shapes. So I'm going to come out here to maybe frame 10 and create a keyframe. And I'll do that for layer 3. I should have named that. The frame right beneath the keyframe that I just created, I'm going to create a keyframe right there. So this is my face layer, and I need to just name it that. And I probably should have put maybe the mouth and the eyes on another layer, but let's just see if we can do it like this. So first I want to change the shape of these eyebrows and change them from a slant to having them kind of slightly bowed. So I can do that just by using just the regular selection tool. placing it over one of these straight lines that represent the eyebrows. And when you get that little arc next to the selection tool, you can just bow that line up. So I've got them a little more rounded. And maybe I will even change the shape of the mouth a little bit. So I'm trying to make this guy look a little bit happier. I don't really like the way the mouth is morphing, but I could probably, go back and fine tune that and make that look a little bit better. But the eyebrows look pretty good. Now I'm going to move on down the timeline. Maybe to frame 20 and create a keyframe for the eyebrows and one for the face. And then I'm going to deselect everything because everything was selected all at once. I don't really want that. And maybe I will take the eyebrows this time and I'm going to use the free transform tool and I'm just going to give them a little bit of a rotate. Maybe even move them over a little bit. So I kind of like that look. So I'll do that with the other one. So I'll move it a little bit. And I'll rotate a little bit. So we have a little more relaxed look on the face now. And I'm even going to edit the mouth a little bit more. So this time I'll do it through this keyframe. And maybe I will try using the subselection tool to select the anchor point of this mouth. Because you can only do so much, with that selection tool. Sometimes you get lucky and it moves the object the way you want it to move, and then sometimes it doesn't. So I'll just delete that anchor point. That might smooth it out. So dare I back out and see what I have? Let's do it. So it's kind of interesting. I would, if I were doing this for real, I would really take my time and explore the right, the right tools or the tools that work the best for each task at hand. So I would probably do something different with the mouth. But hopefully you get the basic idea of shape tweens and how to manipulate objects or visual elements using a shape tween and a series of keyframes. So understanding how keyframes begin to have almost like a magnetic kind of pull, for that visual element based on what the previous keyframe had that object set at. And so there's just this constant tugging of coercing that visual element into its new state at each new keyframe. And so that's how tweens work. So we'll explore this some more on Thursday. And hopefully I've covered enough stuff where you will take some time between now and Thursday and just explore a shape tween and just get in there, and I call it playing in the sandbox, but you just get in there and you just start poking around and experiment with manipulating shapes, specifically shapes that have had shape tweens applied to them. So Thursday we will look at classic tweens, and we'll also explore symbols and why we use them instead of just raw shapes, which is what we've been working with up until this point. So I hope you enjoyed today's demonstration, and I'll see you on Thursday.